Australia has a fair few different time zones, but here's one you may not have known about.
These are the time zones of the world, and these are the time zones of Australia. But these maps
Makes
are
sense.
missing an entire time zone. In fact, all these maps are Australian Central Western Standard Time, UTC plus 8 hours and 45 minutes.
Well, that is news to me. Let me think of the different time zones I know, and I don't know their actual names. Obviously, you got the time zone on the west side of Australia that covers like Perth and whatnot. Adelaide is obviously half an hour in between, which I think is a little bit odd, but it makes sense. You know, that it's a big country. Queensland, they kind of have their own where they don't actually go from summertime to wintertime, do they? And then you've obviously got Victoria and New South Wales. They have, and Tasmania, they have theirs. But that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Does the Northern Territory have a time zone? Surely it doesn't, because it's in line. Okay, but where does this come in? I have no idea. I have never heard a time zone being at the 45-minute mark.
Central Western Time is the time zone for this little corner of Australia along the Air Highway. Just east of the tiny settlement of Kaiguna in Western Australia, a sign on the highway lets you know to change your clock. Central Western Time, or Border Time, extends about 340 kilometres from just outside Kaiguna to Eucla in Western Australia, and just over the state border to Border Village in South Australia. These roadhouses and tiny accompanying settlements have a total population of just a few hundred people. So how did this stretch of the highway get its own time zone?
It almost sounds a bit mean, but what's the point? What is the point? A few hundred people, and those few hundred people still matter, obviously, but what is the point? That is such a small area, and it's only down on the southern coast of the central western area. Is that mean to say, what's the point, as it's only a few hundred people? Maybe it's a bit mean to them, but it seems at the moment a bit pointless to have this extra time zone, although Australia is a bloody big country. Just split Australia up and have multiple countries, problem solved.
Why is it 8 hours and 45 minutes ahead of universal time, and why is it missing from so many maps? This section of the country sits on the Nullarbor Plain and fulfills many of the stereotypes about outback Australia. It's hot, it's dusty, there are barely any trees, and very few people live here. It's at least a 5-hour drive in either direction to the nearest small town of at least 1,000 people. But because of its location, Eucla was the perfect spot for a telegraph station in 1877, a link in the chain that connected the west coast to the rest of the continent. It's hard to find an official source on the origins of this time zone, but it could have been to avoid confusion at the telegraph station, as Western Australia and South Australia are in different time zones. But the telegraph station is near the border. I was told the same story at the Eucla Roadhouse when I visited, but it also should be noted that back in the 1800s, borders weren't as fixed as they are now, especially out in the middle of the Nullarbor, and especially because states didn't even exist back then. They were separate crown colonies, and the definitive surveying and marking of the boundary on the ground didn't happen till the 1920s.
So the whole thing of, so Eucla, yeah, okay, it was a link between the west and the east maybe, but the whole thing of it being the location, i.e. linking the, South Australia and Western Australia, probably isn't necessarily true then, is it? Because there were, like it's saying, there were no borders, and therefore that reasoning isn't necessarily correct.
So there were lots of reasons to be confused about what time it was near the border. Since 1899, South Australia's time zone has been based on the half hour. So a time zone between Western Australia and South Australia is set on the quarter hour. But even though the telegraph station is long since decommissioned, the border time zone lives on. Because for the locals, it's actually very practical to have an extra time zone between Western and South Australia. Because Eucla is more than 1,000 kilometres east of Perth, during summer, when the sun rises at 5 a.m. in Perth, it would be rising earlier than 4:30 a.m. UCLA if they shared the same time zone. With Central Western Time, that difference can be normalized, so the people of the Nullarbor get more daylight during their local working hours.
And that's where it all makes sense, right? That's where it all makes sense. As I said, Australia is so big, and actually look, even if you had Western Australia, South Australia, and just pretend Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria was the same, even if you only had those 3 time zones, that's still a hell of a lot. Because if you think of Europe, for example, and you go from one end of say, the United Kingdom or Portugal, for example, which is the most, I think Portugal's the most westernly, to say Russia or somewhere near the end of Eastern Europe, there are a fair few time zones, which you wouldn't necessarily get here. And so this makes complete sense that actually that is a long, long distance between, say, Perth and UCLA, that, you know, like I said, when the sun comes up, it just doesn't make sense to have the sun rising at like 4 a.m. in the morning. No one wants to. Well, actually, people, if it is really hot, you may want. Actually, it may make sense technically to just keep it the same as Western Europe, because if it's quite hot, you want to get up earlier, maybe? I don't know. But the size of Australia, they could probably split that. Instead of just having it that small area, you have it that width, but getting it going all the way up. That would actually probably make sense, to be fair.
Border time also allows the small community of roadhouses along the air highway to function as just that, its own community. Without Central Western Time, the roadhouse and staff of Border Village, just 12 kilometres down the highway from UCLA and over the South Australian border, would be 1.5 hours ahead from the rest of the roadhouses on this stretch of the Nullarbor. Border time allows these roadhouses to share a time zone, regardless of what time their parent states declare it to be. And that brings me to the last question. Why is Central Western Time missing from so many maps? Well, it's because neither the Western Australian, nor South Australian, nor Australian governments recognise it as being an official time zone. Despite it being signed on the road, locals living by it, and tracked by various time zone databases, it's not an official time zone, according to the states that it overlaps. But that doesn't make it any less real. You can set your phone to it, or you can go to Google right now and find out what the time is in UCLA, and it'll give you the time in local Australian Central Western Standard Time.
I'm doing that right now, okay? I'm doing that right now. Literally, live on this video. All right, clocks, world clock, add UCLA. It is. Like, even on Google, the time now is 4:43. UCLA, if it will focus on, UCLA, there you go, right at the bottom. Incredible. So it has it on Google. Is Google not the resource, the be all and end all? I think it is. And clearly it's on that awful, evil company, Apple, as well. But why do the Australian government and the states, they're the ones that don't officially recognise it, but all the tech does.
So although many maps do still show Central Western Time as a tiny little outline, plenty also don't, showing its unofficial status seems to have created a bit of confusion amongst time zone maps, with some maps showing all the time zones tracked by common time zone databases and others showing only official time zones. But for now, border time remains a little surprise for visitors to the area, a little rebellion of the locals doing what's convenient to them, a little quirk of Australian time zones. So if you're ever driving the Nullarbor, you can look forward to experiencing Australia's tiny and somewhat hidden time zone. Thanks for watching.
Well, I actually think it makes perfect sense, because the size of Australia, it could probably do with another time zone, which does. I don't know, is it more of a faff? I'm from the UK, so we only have one time zone, so it's not an issue. But if you're from somewhere like Australia or America, one of these big countries that has multiple time zones, how do you cope? We, on our recent trip to Australia, you sort of manage, but I think when it comes to sporting events or watching TV, I have no idea. But that's really interesting. The fact that, as I said, that tiny zone is not recognised by Australia or the two states, but it is by Google, Apple. It's a strange one. Hashtag justice for border time. Okay. I don't think that's going to get trending, but a really, really interesting one. That is one that I have never heard of. And it's something I don't really have to deal with because, as like I said, in the UK, we've got one time zone. It's nice and easy. We are like bang in the middle and everyone lives by our time zone, basically. Good old Royal Britannia. That was a fascinating one. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got any more recommendations of any interesting or funny or just something that I'll enjoy from Australia, then please put it in the Discord server. That's down below. And if you want to check out our recent trip to Australia, go to charlieandrob.com and you can see them all there. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. I'll catch you next time.